Hong Kong is under more pressure from China. A new coronavirus outbreak in Beijing sparks wartime measures. And China is spending millions on propaganda in the US. This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. You know, it's been a year since the Hong Kong protests began. Protests first erupted over an extradition bill that would send Hong Kongers to mainland China for trial. I don't know why that would be a problem. China's court system is great. They have a 99.9% conviction rate. I mean, everyone's guilty of something, right? After months of ignoring protesters' requests to get rid of the extradition bill, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam eventually said the bill was dead. But now, the Chinese Communist Party is forcing a national security law on Hong Kong. And guess what that might allow the party to do? Extradite Hong Kongers to mainland China. I see what you did there. Of course, Carrie Lam is ready to go to bat for the people.
Hong Kong leader Carrie Lam has called anyone who opposes China's plan to introduce national security legislation the enemy of the people.
She means the enemy of these people. Who do you think put her in power? She wasn't elected by the people of Hong Kong. No, they're the enemy of the people she's sworn to defend. One of the biggest concerns about the national security law is that it essentially makes criticism of the Chinese Communist Party illegal. And, well, there's been months of Hong Kongers criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. But don't worry, a senior Chinese communist official has said the national security law won't be retroactive. Now I know what you're thinking. Chinese officials lie sometimes. But keep in mind, Hong Kong is a city of only 7 million people. In one protest last year, 2 million people marched. I mean, the Communist Party is great at arresting people, but 2 million is a lot even for the party. What's that, Shelley? Right. China has detained 1 to 2 million Uyghurs. I really shouldn't underestimate the Chinese Communist Party. Speaking of the Hong Kong national security law, China's National People's Congress Standing Committee has passed the first draft. The bill covers 4 types of crimes: secession, subversion of state power, local terrorist activities, and colluding with external foreign forces to endanger national security. We still don't know what the law says about those things because no details on the definitions of those crimes or the applicable punishments were given. Now normally, the NPC Standing Committee has to pass a draft law 3 times before it's finalized, which can take up to 6 months. But they seem to be really motivated to get this one done. In fact, my favorite state-run media, the Global Times, reports that the national security law is likely to be enacted by the end of this month, just in time for Hong Kong's annual July 1st protest. Last year, hundreds of thousands marched, and a group of protesters broke into the Legislative Council. Yeah, the national security law is not going to be good for Hong Kong protesters, which is why the president of Taiwan, Tsai Ing-wen, has pledged humanitarian relief for Hong Kongers. I'm sure that had nothing to do with the fact that the day before, Chinese fighter jets had to be chased off by Taiwanese ones. It was the 3rd time in a week. I guess pushing a war with India isn't enough for the Chinese Communist Party. Did I mention China is going to execute an Australian citizen? This is Carm Gillespie. He disappeared 7 years ago in China. And now, suddenly, he was given a death sentence for drug smuggling. Chinese authorities say he was smuggling 7.5 kilograms of meth. In American units, that's 16 pounds. However, in a social media post that has now been deleted, Gillespie's friends say he was set up. They claim Gillespie was meeting businessmen in China to invest in a storage facility project he was working on. As a sign of good faith in their intentions, they gave him some gifts to take back to Australia with him, brand-name leather goods and luggage that had drugs hidden in the linings. Do I find that believable? Well, do you think it's a coincidence that Gillespie was finally sentenced after 7 years, just as China is desperately trying to stop Australia from calling for an investigation into the origin of the coronavirus. And just as some Australian officials are calling for tariffs on China. It reminds me of when Canada arrested the CFO of Huawei, Meng Wanzhou. And then China suddenly arrested 2 Canadians for spying. And on Friday, they were formally charged with spying. That's more than 18 months after they were first detained. The BBC says both men were being interrogated for between 6 to 8 hours a day. But don't worry, they have a 0.1% chance of being released. What I'm trying to say is, don't go to China if you're from a country that might get on the wrong side of the Chinese regime. Which is pretty much every country now. Even Russia is now accusing one of their own Arctic researchers of spying for China, and they've charged him with treason. Meanwhile, the American Harvard professor who's been charged with hiding his ties to China has pleaded not guilty. I bet he's happy he's not in Russia. DNA! We're full of the stuff. And China has been collecting it from tens of millions of Chinese men and boys. Now, the world's most brutal authoritarian regime has a vast DNA database of its citizens. And a US company, Thermo Fisher, helped them do it. This is not the first time Thermo Fisher has worked with Chinese authorities. Up until February of last year, they were selling DNA sequencers directly to Xinjiang authorities. You know, Xinjiang, where they're harvesting human organs from the Uyghur Muslim minority. And it sure helps when you have DNA sequencers to match clients with non-voluntary donors. Now, what happens if you don't want to give Chinese authorities your DNA? One man was told by authorities they would deprive him and his family of benefits like the right to travel and go to a hospital. And yes, they're doing this to young boys as well. It's okay, little boy. You're in the system now. Okay, that was really depressing. So, here's some good news about the Uyghurs. This week, President Trump signed the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act into law. The law allows the US government to sanction Chinese officials. In fact, Trump is required to submit to Congress a list of Chinese officials who are responsible for human rights abuses in Xinjiang within 180 days of signing the bill. The Trump administration then must sanction those officials by blocking their assets and declaring them ineligible for visas or admission to the United States. The act was passed last month almost unanimously by Congress, showing that once again, the Chinese Communist Party brings us all together. And finally, want to get big on TikTok? Apparently, some users think that praising China can give them a boost, because TikTok is owned by a mainland Chinese company. Check this video out from this Texas songwriter.
So I just found out that the Chinese government's in charge of the algorithm and who gets to get famous. I ain't on no fake or none, but I'm the biggest fan of China. Even this USA hat, shit was made in China. You see that guy? That's my president.
In a few weeks, his subscriber count went from 2,000 to over 90,000. It's not just one guy. Praising China in TikTok videos has become a trend, although most of the videos are more tongue-in-cheek or satirical than genuine. One user made a pro-China video after she suspected her account was shadow banned.
For reasons unbeknownst to me, I've been shadow banned, which is very upsetting. But on a completely unrelated note, I just wanted to let y'all know how much I love China.
She told the Wall Street Journal that after that video, her account was no longer shadow banned. In fact, several users contacted by the Wall Street Journal say they are making videos praising China because they think the videos can help them build audiences on the app. But it's unclear whether TikTok is actually promoting these videos. ByteDance dismissed the theory that its app rewards pro-China content. A company spokesperson called the idea ridiculous. I don't know if we should take their word for it, though. Last year, the US launched a national security review of the app, following concerns by US senators it censored content at Beijing's behest. So if you use TikTok, you might be seeing a lot more of this, and not much of this. And coming up after the break, there's a new outbreak of the coronavirus in Beijing, and authorities are calling for wartime measures to fight it. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Look, I know we're all sick of the coronavirus by now, but, well, okay, hopefully not sick from it, but we're sick of constantly hearing about the coronavirus. But guess what? There's a new coronavirus outbreak in China. The acting mayor of Beijing has adopted what he called wartime measures to contain the spread, which, considering how China has fought wars before, I hope that doesn't mean sending wave after wave of Chinese soldiers at the virus. Anyway, the cases are linked to Xinfadi Market in the southwest of the city, which supplies most of the capital's fresh fruit and vegetables. The market, which also sells meat and seafood, has been shut down since Saturday. Xinfadi claims to be the largest wholesale food market in Asia. More than 10,000 people work at the market, which supplies 90% of Beijing's fruits and vegetables. Authorities sent police to shut down the market, and they completely locked down 11 residential complexes nearby. And then they locked down 10 more neighborhoods and fired officials in that part of Beijing. Then they set up 193 booths across Beijing to do mass testing to identify new cases. Wow, this new outbreak must be really serious. Now, let's see, here are the official numbers. The new coronavirus outbreak in Beijing grew to 106 cases Tuesday, with 29 communities in the sprawling Chinese capital back on lockdown. Okay. 106 new cases in a week doesn't sound like a lot in a city of 20 million people. At least not enough to justify the wartime measures they're talking about. Especially when you compare it to what we're dealing with here in New York City. We saw more than 2,000 new cases in the past week. But here's the thing. 106 new cases in Beijing is just the number officially reported by the Chinese government. And if I had to guess, Chinese officials believe the officially reported number about as much as you do. Which could explain why they're taking such extreme measures. Another reason for extreme measures is that Beijing is the political base of the Chinese Communist Party. The party likes to put up a front that it has absolute control over everything that happens in the country. To have a CCP virus outbreak happen less than 10 miles away from Zhongnanhai, the central leadership compound, is deeply embarrassing. So now, the party has to show that they definitely have everything under control in Beijing, while also churning out propaganda to show how much better China is handling the coronavirus than the rest of the world. Beijing's political sensitivity is why local officials covered up the SARS outbreak there back in 2003, and got sacked for it. Now, for 55 days, Beijing authorities had claimed there were no new locally transmitted coronavirus cases until this latest outbreak happened. So, should we believe that Beijing had gone nearly 2 months with 0 new cases? Or were there new cases popping up all along, but authorities kept covering them up to fit their narrative until it finally got too big and now they're enacting wartime measures because there are way more than 106 cases and authorities are afraid it will spiral out of control? It's hard to know. But if you ask state-run media, the real problem is foreigners.
Beijing's Disease Control and Prevention Centre says the new coronavirus cases in the city might have originated in Europe.
But don't worry, because according to the editor of my favorite state-run media, the Global Times, there is no way Beijing becomes Wuhan 2.0. We will win again. Yes, just like how China was winning the war before in early May. And then, 2 weeks later, authorities locked down more than 100 million people in China's northeast. That's what you do when you're winning. In that case, by the way, the problem was also foreigners. Health officials suspected that the patients may have come into contact with infected returnees from Russia. So, Chinese health authorities are now reporting a small number of cases in Beijing, but They're taking extraordinary measures to lock down neighborhoods, fire officials, and set up mass citywide testing. Yes, very believable. But I'm confident that the Chinese Communist Party will continue to win against the CCP virus, because now they're targeting the real problem: fish. More specifically, salmon. According to the Global Times, the CCP virus was detected on a chopping board used by a seller of imported salmon at Xinfadi Market. That piece of information has now triggered a nationwide salmon boycott in China. China has even halted European salmon imports. Zheng Guang, a senior expert with the National Health Commission, said in an interview with state media on Sunday that we have yet to find out whether human beings transmitted the virus to salmon or salmon contracted the virus first. Okay, that is absurd. I can't believe I have to say this, but fish can't get the coronavirus. It's a virus that only infects mammals. So, if salmon can't get the coronavirus, how did the coronavirus get on the cutting board used for salmon? Keith Neal, an emeritus professor of the epidemiology of infectious diseases at Britain's University of Nottingham, said any link to salmon was likely the result of cross-contamination. Okay, so the coronavirus wasn't from the salmon. It was just cross-contamination from the cutting board. You know what that means. Nationwide boycott of cutting boards. Everyone, throw out your cutting boards. And no more cutting board imports from Europe. This is how China will win the war. Stay tuned after the break, because Chinese state-run media are printing propaganda in U.S. newspapers, and now we know how much they're spending to do it. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Our precious media, the fourth estate. Where would we be without the trusted mainstream media? We'd probably be watching some alternative network like NTD with the show starring some jerk talking about China. This will probably come as no surprise to you. Well, unless this is the first time you're watching this jerk on television, but the Chinese Communist Party has been giving millions of dollars to U.S. newspapers. Yes, an openly hostile, authoritarian regime has been paying American media to publish propaganda. And they took the money. In the past 4 years, the Chinese government has paid a total of $19 million to major media, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal. I mean, democracy dies in darkness, so you gotta pay the electricity bills somehow. China Daily, which is owned by the propaganda department of the Chinese Communist Party, has been paying these American newspapers to run China Watch. Now, it may look like a newspaper section, but it's actually a paid advertisement. It's just designed to look like a newspaper article, so you accidentally confuse Chinese propaganda with mainstream media reporting. China Daily has to disclose its activities semi-annually under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. But a recent amended filing was the first to give a full breakdown of who they paid and how much. It's almost as if they wanted this story to come out and blow up any respect the American public had left for our media. But the real question is, did money from China affect how these media reported on China? Well, that'd be hard to prove. Certainly there have been plenty of cases of Western media either knowingly or unknowingly doing reporting that would please the Chinese Communist Party. Did Chinese money influence foreign policy to write articles criticizing Trump's phone call with the president of Taiwan? Did the millions paid to the Washington Post result in critical reporting of the trade war? Or did the $50,000 the New York Times got lead them to publish opinion pieces like this, or this, or this? Okay, probably not, because $50,000 isn't a lot to a company that got $531 million in advertising revenue last year. And Western media pride themselves on the idea that advertising doesn't affect their editorial decisions. So, maybe it's not the money. Maybe it's the fact they all wanted the Communist Party to allow them to have reporters stationed in China. Well, the joke's on them. Bye-bye Beijing Bureau. But even more worrying than the stories these media report are the stories that they won't report. They might bury stories because of external pressure from Chinese officials or internal pressure over losing business in China, like how Bloomberg News silenced its own journalists for reporting on China corruption. So on one hand, the Chinese Communist Party is directly or indirectly censoring news about China, while on the other hand, they're paying Western media millions of dollars to spread the party's propaganda. And it's not limited to China Daily or US media either. Apparently, now The Economist is taking money from state-run Xinhua News Agency. So, where can you turn for accurate news on China from someone who will never get paid by the Chinese Communist Party? This jerk on China Uncensored, and the rest of the shows on this channel, because you won't find it in the mainstream media. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.